The emergency klaxons wailed through the corridors of Xylos Station, their piercing sound competing with the violent impacts of asteroid fragments against the hull. Red warning lights pulsed in rhythm with the alarms, casting the auxiliary control room in alternating shadows and crimson glares. Through the reinforced viewport, the poisonous purple gas giant Viridia Prime loomed like a malevolent eye, its swirling storms matching the chaos inside the station. Kalen Vance braced himself against the control panel as another impact rocked the station. Sweat beaded on his forehead as his fingers flew across the flickering interface, desperately trying to reroute power to the failing life support systems. Primary oxygen recyclers down to 30%. He muttered, fatigue etching lines around his eyes. His once pristine engineer's uniform was now torn and stained with hydraulic fluid and blood. Some from colleagues who hadn't made it this far. Auxiliary systems failing. Structural integrity compromised in sections 14 through 22. The asteroid storm outside was brutal, but Kalen knew it wasn't their only enemy. The mercenaries who had infiltrated the station an hour ago were methodically making their way through each section, ruthlessly eliminating anyone they encountered. Their motives remained unclear, but their efficiency was terrifying. A shadow moved beside him. Lyravai, the Xyloshan security chief, her tall, lithe form encased in sleek black combat armor. The armor, normally immaculate and gleaming, now bore multiple scorch marks and deep gouges. She moved with predatory grace despite her injuries, checking the sealed door's integrity before returning to the monitoring station. 3 more of them approaching Section 12, she reported, her voice rasping through her helmet's damaged communication system. They'll reach our position in approximately 15 minutes. Kalen nodded grimly. The auxiliary control room had become their last refuge after the mercenaries had stormed the main bridge. As far as they knew, they might be the only survivors. Any luck establishing communication with the outpost on Viridia, too? He asked, though he already suspected the answer. Negative, Lyravai replied curtly. They're jamming all outgoing signals. The emergency beacon is also compromised. Another violent impact rocked the station, more severe than the previous ones. The lights flickered, and several systems went dark. When the emergency generators kicked in seconds later, Kalen saw that a large piece of debris had penetrated the outer hull just meters from their position. The room's integrity was still holding, but barely. The impact had thrown Lyravai against a wall. She regained her footing, but immediately staggered, her movement suddenly labored. Her right hand clutched at the neck seal of her armor. Lyravai. Kalen moved toward her, concern overriding his focus on the systems. The Xyloshan warrior staggered again, her breathing suddenly audible and ragged through the helmet speakers. She sank to one knee, still fighting to maintain her composure. Environmental systems failing, she managed, each word a struggle. Ventilation, compromised. Suit, pressure, unstable. Kalen rushed to her side, his diagnostic scanner already in hand. The readings confirmed his fears. The impact had damaged critical systems in her armor. What had once been her protection was now becoming a death trap. Kalen, she gasped, her voice breaking through the static of the failing comm system. You must remove this armor. I cannot breathe. He hesitated for a split second. In the 3 years they had worked together on Xylos Station, he had never seen a Xyloshan without their protective armor. It wasn't just equipment. It was cultural, almost sacred. The few Xyloshans who had integrated into human space colonies were notoriously private about their physical forms. Another labored breath from Lyravai broke his hesitation. Tell me what to do, he said, already examining the complex, interlocking plates of her armor. Emergency, release, sequence, she managed between gasps. Base of neck, then chest plate, sequential. Her instructions faded as she fought for breath. Kalen worked quickly, finding the recessed emergency release mechanism at the base of her helmet. The seals hissed as they disengaged, allowing him to carefully remove the helmet. What greeted him stopped his breath for a moment. Instead of the humanoid face he had subconsciously expected, he found himself staring at a visage that defied easy description. Lyra Vi's face was vaguely humanoid in structure, but composed of what appeared to be translucent crystalline tissue that emitted a soft, pulsing purple light. Her features were delicate, almost sculpted, with no hair but elegant crystalline formations that resembled a crown. Her eyes were large, almond-shaped pools of deeper violet that regarded him with pain and what might have been embarrassment. "Continue," she whispered, her voice musical without the helmet's filtration. "Please." Kalen nodded, regaining his focus. This was no time for cultural shock. Following her gasped instructions, he worked through the emergency release sequence, removing the chest plate, arm guards, and the complex back piece that housed most of the environmental systems. As each piece came away, more of Lyra Vi was revealed. Her entire body shared the same crystalline, translucent quality, with the purple light pulsing in what he realized must be the rhythm of her heartbeat. In places, her skin was almost completely transparent, revealing intricate internal structures that resembled crystal formations rather than organs. Certain areas were more opaque, preserving her modesty in a way that seemed almost deliberately designed. With the final pieces removed, Lyra Vi took a deep, shuddering breath. The purple light of her skin brightened slightly and then stabilized to a steady, gentle glow. She remained kneeling, seemingly gathering her strength, the crystalline structure of her form catching and refracting the emergency lights in mesmerizing patterns. "Thank you," she said after a moment, her voice stronger now. She looked up at him, those violet eyes studying his reaction. "Few non-Xylosians have seen one of my kind in our natural state." Kayla nodded, still processing what he was seeing. Will you be all right without the armor?" "For now," she replied, carefully rising to her feet. She was slightly taller than he'd realized, nearly 2 meters in height. "The atmosphere here is tolerable, though not ideal. I will adjust." She looked down at the pieces of armor scattered around them. The suit was more than protection. It was concealment. "My lineage is rare among my people. Our crystalline nature is not common knowledge." Kalen wanted to ask more, fascinated despite their dire circumstances, but the station's warning system chose that moment to emit another urgent alert. The mercenaries were getting closer. Lyra Vi's expression shifted, the light patterns beneath her translucent skin changing from purple to a deeper blue. "We don't have much time," she said, moving to the control panel. Her movements were fluid, almost graceful now that she was freed for the damaged armor. "I need to tell you something important, something that may explain the attack." She reached into a concealed compartment in what remained of her chest plate and extracted a small, metallic sphere about the size of a plum. As she held it, the sphere seemed to respond to her touch, tiny lights within it activating in patterns that somehow complemented the glow of her skin. "This is a Genesis seed," she explained, her tone solemn. "It contains the complete genetic mapping and ecological knowledge of the Etherean coral forest that once flourished on Viridia 3 before the Cataclysm. The last of its kind, entrusted to me for safekeeping until it could reach the Xylosian Science Council." Kalen stared at the small object, suddenly understanding the gravity of their situation. "That's what they're after." Lyra Vi nodded, the light patterns beneath her skin shifting to a tense amber color. "The Genesis seed technology is coveted. With it, extinct ecosystems can be reborn, but the same technology could be weaponized to create or destroy entire biospheres." She carefully returned the seed to its hiding place. "We must reach the escape pod bay on the far side of the station. It's our only chance now." Kalen nodded grimly, turning to the station schematics displayed on one of the still-functioning screens. "Normal routes are cut off," he said, studying the layout. "The mercenaries have secured most of the main corridors, and the asteroid impacts have compromised several sections." He traced a path with his finger, then stopped, remembering something. "Wait, there's an old maintenance tunnel system that runs parallel to the primary conduits. It's tight and dangerous, but it might get us there." Lyra Vi, moved beside him, her proximity casting a soft purple glow over the schematics. "Show me." Kalen brought up the engineering overlays, revealing a network of narrow tunnels that service the station's infrastructure. "Here, they're not meant for regular transit, but they should bypass the occupied areas." "It will be difficult without my armor," Lyravai commented, studying the route. "But I see no alternative." Kalen gathered what supplies he could: a repair kit, emergency rations, a portable diagnostic tool, and a small plasma cutter that might serve as a weapon if necessary. Lyravai collected a few pieces of her armor that might still provide some protection, though she left most of the bulkier components behind. "Ready?" he asked, moving to the maintenance access panel hidden behind a storage unit. Lyravai nodded, the light beneath her crystalline skin, pulsing once, brightly, before settling back to its steady glow. "Lead the way, Engineer Vance." Using the plasma cutter, Kalen quickly removed the access panel, revealing a dark, narrow tunnel beyond. "It'll be tight," he warned, peering into the darkness. "And I don't know what condition these tunnels are in after the impacts." "I can provide some light," Lyravai said, and as if in response to her words, the glow from her crystalline form intensified slightly, casting a soft purple radiance around them. "An advantage of my nature." With a nod of appreciation, Kalen entered the tunnel first, with Lyravai close behind. The maintenance passage was even more cramped than he had anticipated, forcing them to crawl in places. The metal was cold against his hands and knees, and in some sections they had to navigate around exposed wiring and leaking pipes. As they moved through the tunnel system, distant sounds of the station's ongoing destruction reached them. Metallic groans as structural supports gave way, the hiss of escaping air, and occasionally, disturbingly, the muffled sound of weapons fire. "Your people," Lyravai said softly after they had been crawling for some time, "Earth humans. You've spread across 3 star systems now." "5, actually," Kalen corrected, pausing to check their position against a small maintenance chart etched into a junction. "Though the colonies in the Altair and Tau Ceti systems are still in early stages." "Do you miss your homeworld?" The question surprised him. Lyravai had always been professional, almost detached in their previous interactions. Personal questions had never been part of their relationship. Sometimes, he admitted, choosing the right path and continuing forward. "I was born on Mars, actually. 3rd-generation colonist. I've only visited Earth twice." "Mars," she repeated, the word carrying a musical quality in her natural voice. "The red planet. For what I've studied, it seems stark, beautiful in its desolation." "It is," Kalen agreed, feeling a momentary pang of homesickness. "We've greened the northern valleys now, but much of it remains untamed. My family lives in Olympus City under the Big Dome. My father helped design some of the water reclamation systems there." He paused, realizing he was sharing more than necessary given their situation. "What about you? Do you miss Xylos?" There was a moment of silence, broken only by their movement through the tunnel. "I was not born on Xylos Prime," she finally said. "My birthplace was a small colony world called Luminera. It was beautiful." The crystal forest there sang in the wind. Her voice grew softer. "It was destroyed in the border conflicts with the Tauran hegemony 20 of your Earth years ago." Kalen stopped for a moment, looking back at her. In the soft purple glow of her skin, he could see a depth of sorrow in her eyes that transcended species differences. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "As am I for all worlds lost to conflict," she replied. "Perhaps that is why the Genesis seed is so important. It represents the possibility of restoration, of bringing back what was thought to be forever lost." They continued in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. The tunnel began to slope upward, making their progress more strenuous. At one point, they encountered a section where the ceiling had partially collapsed, forcing them to squeeze through a narrow gap one at a time. As Kalen helped pull Lyravai through the tight space, he couldn't help but notice the unexpected warmth of her crystalline skin, so different from the cool, hard surface he had unconsciously expected. The light within her pulsed more rapidly with the exertion, creating beautiful, shifting patterns beneath the surface. "We should be approaching the central laboratory section," he said as they continued, consulting his portable scanner. "From there, we can access another maintenance tunnel that leads directly to the escape pod bay." "Be cautious," Lyravi warned. The laboratory would be a logical place for them to search, given the nature of this station's research. Kalen nodded in agreement. Moving with increased caution, they approached a ventilation grate that, according to his scanner, opened into a storage area adjacent to the main laboratory. He worked quietly to loosen the grate, using tools from his repair kit to minimize noise. With the grate finally free, Kalen peered into the dimly lit storage room beyond. It appeared empty, with rows of supply shelves creating shadowed aisles. He slipped through the opening, then turned to help Lyravi, her crystalline form casting eerie, beautiful shadows as she emerged from the maintenance tunnel. "Wait," she whispered, placing a hand on his arm. The light beneath her skin had dimmed to an almost imperceptible glow. "Listen." Kalen stilled, straining his ears. At first, he heard nothing beyond the distant alarms and the structural groans of the dying station. Then, faintly, he detected voices coming from the laboratory beyond the storage room's sealed door. They moved silently between the shelves, approaching the door that separated the storage area from the main laboratory. It was partially ajar, allowing snippets of conversation to reach them. Scanning the entire section, they couldn't have gone far. The voice was gruff, professional, with an accent Kalen couldn't quite place. "The Xylation is priority. Dr. Thorne wants her alive, if possible." A second voice, colder than the first. "And the human engineer? Expendable." Though Thorne would prefer to question him first. Kalen felt his blood run cold at the mention of the name. It couldn't be possible. Dr. Eris Thorne had been his mentor at the Earth Space Engineering Corps, a brilliant mind and pioneer in xenobiological research. Thorne had been declared dead 5 years ago after a catastrophic accident at the Europa Research Facility. Lyravi must have sensed a shock. She gave him a questioning look, her crystalline features arranged in an expression of concern. "Let's try to see who's in there," Kalen whispered, pushing aside his disbelief to focus on their immediate survival. They edged closer to the door, positioning themselves to peer through the narrow opening without being seen. The laboratory beyond was in disarray, equipment scattered and several workstations damaged. 3 figures in advanced combat armor stood among the chaos, their suits bearing no insignia or identification. A 4th figure stood with his back to the door, studying a holographic display. When the figure turned, Kalen had to suppress a gasp. Despite the years, he would recognize that face anywhere. Dr. Eris Thorne, supposedly dead for half a decade. The man had aged, with deeper lines around his eyes and gray streaking his once dark hair, but it was unmistakably him. He wore a high-tech combat suit that seemed more advanced than those of his mercenaries, with additional systems and interfaces glowing at various points. "Expand the search perimeter," Thorne was saying, his voice still carrying the same authoritative tone Kalen remembered. The station sensors detected Xylation life signs in this sector less than 20 minutes ago, and I want all maintenance access points sealed and monitored. Vance is resourceful. He'll use any path available. One of the mercenaries nodded and moved toward the storage room door. Kalen and Lyravi barely had time to duck behind a tall shelf before the door swung fully open. The mercenary scanned the room briefly, then returned to the laboratory, seeming satisfied that it was empty. "We need to move," Lyravi whispered, her voice barely audible. "Now." Kalen nodded, still shaken by the revelation. They retreated silently toward the ventilation grate they had entered through, but before they could reach it, a violent tremor shook the station. One of the shelving units toppled, crashing loudly to the floor and spilling its contents. "What was that?" came a sharp voice from the laboratory. "Check the storage room again." "Run," Kalen urged, abandoning stealth for speed. They dashed for the far end of the storage room, searching for another exit. Kalen spotted a service door that, according to the emergency floor plan nearby, led to a connecting corridor. They reached it just as the main door fully opened and mercenaries poured in, weapons raised. "There!" The Xylotian, one shouted, opening fire. Lyra Vi pushed Kalen through the service door as energy bolts sizzled past them. They sprinted down the narrow corridor beyond, alarms blaring around them as their presence triggered security systems. "Seal all exits. Lock down the section." Thorne's voice commanded over the station's comm system, which the mercenaries had apparently accessed. The corridor ahead branched into 3 directions. Lyra Vi grabbed Kalen's arm, pulling him toward the right passage. "The central computer node is this way," she said, her crystalline form now glowing more intensely, likely from stress or exertion. "If we can reach it, I can trigger an emergency override on the escape pod systems." They ran as fast as they could, the sound of pursuit not far behind. The station continued to shudder around them, the asteroid storm outside still battering the weakened structure. In places, the corridor was damaged, forcing them to climb over fallen beams or squeeze through partially collapsed sections. "Kalen," Lyra Vi said as they paused for breath in a small alcove, "that human, Dr. Thorne, you recognized him." Kalen nodded grimly. "He was my teacher, my mentor. He's supposed to be dead. Evidently, he is very much alive," she observed, "and leading those who want the Genesis seed." "I don't understand," Kalen said, the betrayal still fresh. "Thorne was dedicated to cooperation between species, to preservation of life. This doesn't make sense." "People change," Lyra Vi replied, her voice carrying a weight of experience. "Or perhaps they reveal who they truly were all along." Before Kalen could respond, a voice echoed through the corridor, not over the comm system, but from just around the corner. "I always knew you were clever, Kalen. It's one of the reasons I selected you for the Xylos project." Dr. Eris Thorne stepped into view, flanked by 2 mercenaries. He looked different up close, harder, colder than the man Kalen had known. An odd device was attached to his right temple, glowing with a sickly blue light that seemed to pulse in time with his words. "Dr. Thorne," Kalen said, instinctively moving to position himself between the newcomers and Lyra Vi. "You're supposed to be dead." Thorne smiled, though the expression didn't reach his eyes. "The Europa incident was convenient. Omnicorp needed my expertise without the oversight of the Earth Science Council. I needed resources they could provide, a mutually beneficial arrangement." Omnicorp, Kalen's disbelief grew. "They're weapons manufacturers, not research scientists." "Such limited thinking, Kalen. I expected better from you." Thorne took a step forward, his gaze shifting to Lyra Vi. "The lines between weapons and biological systems have always been blurry. The Xylotian crystalline physiology, for instance. Imagine combat units with self-regenerating crystalline exoskeletons or infiltration agents who can alter their appearance at will." Lyra Vi straightened, her form seeming to grow more imposing as the light within her intensified to a deep, angry purple. "My people are not your laboratory specimens, human. Perhaps not willingly," Thorne conceded with a cold smile. "But the Genesis seed you carry offers even greater potential. Ecosystem engineering at the molecular level, creation or destruction with equal ease." He extended a hand. "Give it to me now, and perhaps we can come to an arrangement that doesn't end with both of you dissected for study." Kalen glanced around desperately, looking for any means of escape. The alcove they had taken refuge in was a dead end, with Thorne and his mercenaries blocking the only exit. His hand closed around the plasma cutter in his pocket, a feeble weapon against their advanced armor, but better than nothing. "Kalen," Lyra Vi said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was surprisingly warm, almost hot, and he noticed the light patterns beneath her skin were shifting rapidly, concentrating around her free hand. "When I move, be ready." Before he could ask what she meant, Lyra Vi stepped forward, her crystalline body suddenly flaring with intense light. The mercenaries flinched, momentarily blinded, and in that instant, she moved with astonishing speed, her open palm striking the nearest control panel on the wall. The panel sparked and smoked under her touch, and suddenly the corridor's emergency containment system activated. A thick fireproof barrier slammed down between them and Thorn, nearly catching the doctor as he lunged forward. "Run," Lyravai urged, already moving down the corridor in the opposite direction. They sprinted away, hearing Thorn's enraged shouts behind them, muffled by the barrier. Kaelin followed Lyravai's luminous form through the darkened corridors, realizing she had shorted out the local power grid with whatever she had done to the control panel. "How did you?" he began. "Crystalline bioelectric discharge," she explained between breaths. "A defensive mechanism. It won't hold them for long." They reached a junction where the corridor had partially collapsed. Beyond it, Kaelin could see signs for the escape pod bay. So close, yet separated from them by a dangerous tangle of twisted metal and exposed power conduits. "We have to find another way," he said, scanning the area with his diagnostic tool. "There is no other way," Lyravai replied grimly. "The station is falling apart. We must go through." Examining the collapsed section more carefully, Kaelin identified a narrow path that might allow them passage. "There," he pointed, "but we'll have to go one at a time, and carefully. Those exposed power lines are still live." Lyravai nodded. "You go first. I'll follow." Kaelin began navigating the treacherous path, ducking under a fallen support beam and stepping gingerly over sparking cables. The metal groaned ominously under his weight, but held. When he reached the other side, he turned back to guide Lyravai. "Watch the conduit on your left," he called. "And there's a loose panel that—" His warning was cut short by the sound of energy weapons discharging behind Lyravai. The barrier hadn't held Thorn and his mercenaries as long as they'd hoped. "Go!" Lyravai shouted, diving into the debris field as energy bolts sizzled past her. Her crystalline form twisted with impossible grace between the obstacles, the light within her pulsing rapidly with exertion. She was halfway through when Thorn appeared, at the entrance to the collapsed section, a high-tech energy weapon in his hand. Unlike the mercenaries' weapons, this one hummed with a deeper, more menacing tone. "The Genesis seed, Xylotian," he demanded, "or I'll ensure there's not enough left of you for even a basic tissue sample." Lyravai had almost reached Kaelin when Thorn fired. The energy blast seemed different from the mercenaries' weapons, darker, almost purple itself, with arcing tendrils of electricity surrounding the main beam. In the split second before it struck, Lyravai launched herself toward Kaelin, shoving him aside. The blast caught her squarely in the back, sending her crashing into him. They both tumbled to the floor on the safe side of the collapse, momentarily protected from Thorn by the debris field. "Lyravai," Kaelin gasped, untangling himself from her. To his horror, he saw that the blast had severely damaged her crystalline form. A large section of her back was blackened, with cracks spreading outward like a spiderweb. The light within her had dimmed significantly, pulsing weakly and irregularly. "The pod bay," she whispered, her voice faint. So close, Kaelin looked up, seeing that the escape pod bay entrance was indeed just meters away. Supporting Lyravai as best he could, he half-carried her toward it. Behind them, he could hear Thorn and the mercenaries beginning to navigate the debris field. The escape pod bay was in better condition than much of the station, its critical systems protected by redundant safety measures. A single escape pod remained in its berth, its systems glowing with standby readiness. Kaelin helped Lyravai into the pod, gently setting her down on one of the acceleration couches. Her condition was deteriorating rapidly. The cracks in her crystalline form were spreading, and the light within her was fading to a dull, intermittent glow. "We made it," he said, trying to sound encouraging as he began the launch sequence. "Just hold on a little longer." "Kaelin," she said, her voice barely audible. "The Genesis seed. Take it." With trembling hands, she extracted the small metallic sphere from its hiding place. As she held it out to him, he could see that it too had been damaged, its surface cracked from the impact when they fell. "I'll get it to your people," he promised, accepting the seed and securing it in his pocket. The escape pod systems came online, but a warning flashed across the console. "Launch sequence interrupted," external override active. No, Kalen muttered, frantically working the controls. He's locked us out. Kalen Vance. Dr. Thorne's voice came over the pod's communication system. I've always admired your tenacity, but this is pointless. The station is lost. The xylation is dying. Surrender the Genesis seed, and I'll allow you to launch. Continue to resist, and you'll join this doomed station in oblivion. Kalen looked at Lyra Vi, whose crystalline form was now more dark than light, the beautiful patterns fading like stars at dawn. Her eyes, still vibrantly violet despite her condition, met his. Never trust him, she whispered. He will kill you regardless. Kalen nodded, his mind racing. He studied the pod systems, looking for any vulnerability in Thorne's override. There, the emergency manual launch sequence, designed to function even if the main computer was compromised. But it required someone to remain in the bay to activate it physically. I have an idea, he told Lyra Vi, quickly explaining his plan. But I'll have to leave you for a moment. She nodded weakly. Hurry. Kalen exited the pod and moved to the emergency launch controls on the far wall of the bay. As he had hoped, Thorne's override hadn't accounted for this legacy system. He began the manual sequence, entering the override codes he knew as the station's chief engineer. A futile gesture, Kalen. Thorne's voice came again, now from the bay entrance. The doctor stood there alone, his mercenaries apparently left behind. The strange device at his temple pulsed more rapidly. I've locked down all launch systems. Not all of them, Kalen replied, continuing his work. You always did underestimate outdated technology, Doctor. Thorne raised his weapon. Step away from the controls, Kalen. Final warning. Instead of complying, Kalen grabbed a loose piece of equipment and hurled it at Thorne, forcing the doctor to duck. In that moment, Kalen completed the launch sequence and dove for the pod, energy blasts from Thorne's weapon sizzling past him. He reached the pod just as the bay doors began to cycle open. Sealing the hatch, he strapped himself in beside Lyra Vi, whose condition had worsened even in the short time he'd been gone. Launch sequence initiated, the pod's computer announced. Departure in 10 seconds. Outside, Thorne had reached the pod's viewport. His face, contorted with rage, was inches from the glass, the device on his temple glowing almost white with intensity. This isn't over, Vance, he shouted, the sound barely audible through the thick barrier. Omnicorp has resources beyond your imagination. The pod's engines ignited, pushing them away from the dying station. Through the viewport, Kalen watched as Thorne grew smaller, still standing in the bay as emergency shutters began to close around him. As they accelerated away, the full extent of the station's damage became visible. Huge sections had been torn away by the asteroid storm, and even as they watched, a massive explosion bloomed from the central hub, sending debris scattering into space. Whether Thorne had escaped or perished in the destruction, Kalen couldn't tell. The pod's automatic systems carried them away from the danger zone, plotting a course that would eventually take them to a shipping lane where they might be detected by passing vessels. But Kalen's attention was not on their trajectory. Lyra Vi, he said softly, turning to his companion. The crystalline being who had become so much more than a colleague in these past desperate hours was barely glowing now, the light within her flickering like a candle in a strong wind. The Genesis seed, she whispered, her voice so faint he had to lean close to hear. It's damaged, but not beyond hope. Kalen took the sphere from his pocket. The crack in its surface had widened, and a strange, luminescent fluid was seeping from it, similar in color to the light within Lyra Vi. Can it be repaired? He asked. She managed a weak approximation of a headshake. Not conventionally. The living matrix is degrading. With obvious effort, she raised a hand toward the seed. But its essence can be preserved. Her fingertips touched the damaged sphere, and immediately a connection seemed to form between them. The light from the leaking seed flowed like liquid into Lyra Vi's crystalline fingertips, creating beautiful, complex patterns that spread up her arm. What are you doing? Kalen asked, alarmed. The only thing I can, she replied, her voice stronger for a moment as the energy from the seed flowed into her. I am dying, Kalen, but I can become the vessel. My crystalline matrix can preserve the seed's essence until it reaches those who can extract it properly. The process continued, the seed's energy flowing into Lyravi, temporarily brightening her fading light. The patterns it created within her were unlike anything Kalen had seen before. Complex, beautiful, almost like a star map or the neural network of some vast, unknown being. Will it save you? He asked, hope rising briefly. The look she gave him was gentle, tinged with sorrow. No, my physical form is too damaged, but my consciousness and the seed's essence will remain linked, preserved for a time. As the last of the energy transferred, the metallic sphere crumbled to dust in her hand. The light within Lyravi pulsed once, brightly, before settling into a new pattern, steadier than before, but still clearly fading. Kalen, she said, her voice suddenly clear despite her condition. I need to ask one more thing of you. Something difficult. Anything, he promised without hesitation. When my light fades completely, she explained, my crystalline form will begin to degrade rapidly. But if someone I trust, is in direct contact at that moment, a transference can occur. A small part of me and the seed's essence can be preserved. Kalen understood immediately what she was asking. A transference? To me? She nodded weakly. It has never been done with a non-xylation. It might not work. It might be dangerous for you, but it's the only way now to preserve what the seed contains. I'll do it, Kalen said without hesitation. Just tell me how. When a moment comes, when my light begins to fade for the last time, place your hands here. She guided his hands to rest on either side of the crystalline structure that approximated a human heart. And do not let go, no matter what happens. They sat in silence for a time, the escape pod carrying them farther from the destroyed station. Occasionally, the pod would shudder as it encountered debris from the explosion, but its shields held. Through the viewport, the stars were brilliant against the velvet darkness of space, with the purple mass of Iridia Prime slowly receding behind them. It's beautiful, isn't it? Lyravi said softly, gazing at the view. The universe, so vast, so full of wonders we barely understand. Yes, Kalen agreed, still keeping vigil beside her. Beautiful and terrible in equal measure. My people have a saying, she continued, her voice growing fainter. The light never truly dies. It only changes form, traveling outward forever, touching everything in its path. Kalen nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. The light within Lyravi was fading noticeably now, the once vibrant purple dimming to a pale lavender. It's time, she whispered. Remember your promise. He placed his hands where she had shown him, feeling a strange warmth emanating from her crystalline form. The fading light within her pulsed once, twice, then began to dim rapidly. Thank you, Kalen Vance, Lyravi said, her voice now barely audible, for your courage, your compassion. In another time, another life. Her voice trailed off as the light within her flickered desperately, then suddenly flared with unexpected brilliance. Kalen felt an intense heat beneath his palms, spreading up his arms like liquid fire. The sensation was painful but not unbearable, reminiscent of the pins and needles feeling of blood returning to a numbed limb, multiplied 1,000-fold. The light from Lyravi's form seemed to flow directly into him, following the pathways of his nervous system. He watched in astonishment as faint, luminous patterns appeared beneath the skin of his arms, tracing the paths of veins and arteries, spreading upward toward his torso. The process lasted only seconds, but it felt like an eternity. When it finally ceased, Kalen slumped back in his seat, exhausted beyond measure. Beside him, Lyravi's crystalline form had gone completely dark, no trace of light remaining within. Even as he watched, tiny fractures began to appear across her surface, the once beautiful crystalline structure beginning to crumble. Goodbye, he whispered, grief washing over him as her form continued to degrade. Looking down at his own arms, he saw that the luminous patterns had faded to near invisibility, but when he concentrated, he could make them appear, faint purple lines just beneath his skin, flowing with his pulse. More than physical changes, he sensed something else. Impressions, fragments of memory and knowledge that weren't his own. Glimpses of crystal forests singing in alien winds. The feeling of sunlight absorbed directly through crystalline skin. Scientific knowledge about ecosystems, so complex he couldn't begin to comprehend them. And underlying it all, a sense of purpose, of responsibility to preserve what had been entrusted to him. The escape pod continued its journey through the void, its single living occupant sitting in silent vigil beside the gradually disintegrating remains of a being who had given everything to preserve hope for a lost world. 3 months later, a small transport ship descended through the atmosphere of a frontier world called New Haven. The planet was sparsely populated, a haven for those seeking to escape the increasingly complex politics of Earth-controlled space. Kalen Vance stepped off the transport, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder containing all his worldly possessions. He wore long sleeves despite the warm climate, concealing the patterns that occasionally glowed beneath his skin when his emotions ran strong. The official story of the Xylos Station disaster reported that it had been destroyed by an unusually severe asteroid storm, with all hands lost. Omnicorp had issued a statement mourning the loss of valuable research, while quietly absorbing several subsidiary companies that had been involved with the station. Kalen had been rescued by a passing cargo hauler, which had detected the escape pod's beacon. He had reported a heavily edited version of events to the Earth Space Authority, mentioning the mercenary attack, but leaving out Dr. Thorne, Omnicorp, the Genesis seed, and especially what had happened between him and Lyra Vi at the end. The crystalline remains had deteriorated completely before rescue arrived, leaving no evidence of her unique nature. After debriefing, he had resigned his position with the Earth Space Engineering Corps, citing trauma from the incident. No one had questioned his decision. Now, standing on this distant world, he felt both lost and purposeful. The fragments of memory and knowledge from Lyra Vi and the Genesis seed had continued to integrate with his own consciousness, becoming clearer with time. He understood now why he had been drawn to this particular planet. There were others here, like Lyra Vi, Xylosians of the crystalline lineage who had chosen exile over the politics of their homeworld. As night fell on his first day on New Haven, Kalen walked to a high ridge overlooking the settlement. The stars above were unfamiliar configurations, but no less beautiful for their strangeness. He rolled up his sleeve, concentrating on the feeling he'd been practicing. Slowly, the patterns beneath his skin began to glow with a soft purple light, flowing like liquid starlight through his veins. "I made it," he said quietly to the night sky, as if Lyra Vi might somehow hear him. "And I'll find a way to complete what you started." He didn't yet know how he would fulfill the promise he'd made, how to properly preserve and eventually deliver the genetic essence now intertwined with his own being. But for the first time since the destruction of Xylos Station, he felt a sense of peace, of rightness in his path. The light within him pulsed gently, resonating with the starlight above. Somewhere in the distance, he thought he heard a faint crystalline chiming, like delicate wind chimes stirred by a gentle breeze. Whether it was real or imagined, he couldn't tell, but he took it as a sign that he was where he needed to be. As Kalen Vance stood beneath the alien stars, a human carrying within him the legacy of another species and the hope for a lost ecosystem, he understood what Lyra Vi had meant in her final moments. The light never truly dies. It only changes form, traveling outward forever, touching everything in its path. And in that knowledge, he found the strength to continue the journey that had only just begun.